Good morning, Deed Grabbers. It's Thursday. You know what that means. Time for Goat Talk. Want to learn about short-term rentals, how to make those things profitable and make some money? Well, join us this morning when we're back in 45 seconds. Good morning, sub-tours. Welcome to Goat Talk for Thursday, December the 15th. Gosh, we've only got a couple of weeks left in the year. So what are you guys doing to make a difference in your real estate investing business? Today, we're going to talk about short-term rentals. First, I'd like to ask you, if you're following us on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you're not, well, why aren't you? We release videos almost every single day, something on real estate investing, creative finance, sub-2, something to help you with your real estate investing business. You can subscribe to our channel. We make it really easy for you. Just go to sub2tv.com. It's SUB, 2tv.com. And if you're looking for the best creative finance and sub-2 training on the planet, go check out our products and coaching at sub2university.com. All right, so you guys get over there and take a look at that. We've also got $7 coaching. If you're interested in creative finance and sub-2 and you don't want to spend thousands of dollars trying to figure out if it's for you, I guarantee you won't find a better deal than $7 coaching. So go to $7coaching.com and check that out. Guys, we are going to talk to Kirby Atwell today. Kirby, we're going to bring you on in here and talk about short-term rentals. Good morning.
William, it's awesome to be here.
Oh, man, it's great to have you. Guys, introduce yourselves. Let us know where you're from and what you're interested in. We'd love to take your questions today. Kirby, I met Kirby, I don't know, a few weeks ago. We checked out his podcast, and you guys know that I'm not much into the rental game, but he really made it sound interesting. So I wanted to have him on here to talk about that today. Kirby, tell everybody about yourself and how you got started in investing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of started a little bit unconventionally. I started with the military first. So I went to West Point, and then I served 6 years as an officer. And while I was in the Army, I started doing a lot of self-education. So picked up lots of books, and I knew I was always interested in entrepreneurship, but then that kind of grew into real estate, and I realized that's what I want to do the rest of my life. So so then I got out of the military in 2011, and I had this thought in my mind that I was going to jump into real estate, start my own business, do everything myself, make a bunch of money. And that isn't exactly how it played out. It took a lot longer to get started than I thought. And I made a lot of mistakes and didn't really make much money for a while. And I thought initially I wanted to flip properties. So I partnered with a couple friends, and we flipped properties from 2011 to 2016. And we flipped about 70 properties throughout that time, throughout Chicagoland area. And that's when I realized that I had no assets. And I was pretty much in the exact same place I'd started, even though we'd made millions of revenue. So it was a real wake-up call for me. And that's when I really shifted my company into rentals. And then a few years later into this, what I think of as sort of an outside the box approach to short-term rentals that's that nobody really talks about for some reason, but it's a way to really maximize your revenue.
Yeah. You know, most of the short-term rental things you hear about people talking about are these high dollar houses that are expensive to rent. Jody and I have been on, I call it the epic road trip for the last 18 months, renting a higher dollar short-term rentals and living in those, and they're great. But, you know, one of the dangers and this is the twist on it that I always hear, and the reason that I never thought it was a good idea was that you find a house you can buy that won't cash flow as a regular rental. The solution's always, well, we'll just turn it into an Airbnb and it'll cash flow. And I think that's dangerous, because what if, and I know we're going to talk about this later, what if the city decides no more Airbnbs? You're stuck with this alligator. And that's why I liked you, because you had a different take on it, non-traditional in affordable markets. So that's why we're excited to have you here today. So tell us more about that. How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, exactly as you said, like over the last several years, especially after COVID, there's been a lot of short-term rental investors who have looked really smart, buying these higher end properties, and you can run the numbers on a $800,000 cabin in the mountains, and it cash flows really well at that price point. And so those same cabins previously were like $500,000 just a few years earlier, but it makes sense to buy them at 800,000, because when you run the numbers, you can see it's a 90% occupancy rate, and people are paying, $1,500 a night in the high season. And, from a cash flow standpoint, it makes sense. But like you said, then as things start to turn, and if you pay attention to the media now, that's all you hear about right now is how occupancy rates have dropped and overall revenue's down. And so now if you can't get that 90% occupancy rate, and that's what you're basing your purchasing on, now what do you do? And, can you rent that as a long-term rental? Or if everyone is in that same boat and they all try to sell and interest rates are higher and the market's not quite what it used to be, what are your options? So my approach is to buy in more what I call utilitarian markets, where this model works really well, which is it's counterintuitive to what most people think of as vacation rentals. I think of Airbnb and vacation rentals simultaneously. And our properties work really well as vacation rentals. So what the way that I identify a market that I think makes sense is a market that's within an hour drive of a larger city, that has some local draws. But when you look at the purchase price, it's typically about a third or a fourth of what it would be in that larger city. And so if you look at the comparables on Airbnb, you can start to see that the nightly rates, though, might be a 30% or 20% difference from being in the city. So you're buying it at a fourth of the cost, but the nightly rate is only, 30% lower. And so the ROI on these properties is phenomenal. So they will work as vacation rentals. There's still local draws that bring people there. But then in the off season, like right now, I've got people coming in for the holidays, for family visits, for graduations, for funerals, for weddings, for all the things that if you have this $1 million cabin in the mountains, nobody's going to stay there for those reasons. They're there for a high-end vacation, and that's the only reason they go there. So, so I think it's just, you're in a much safer position, and the ROI is just out of this world.
Right. So if I understand you correctly, these houses would work as a regular long-term rental if it came to that. They would still cash flow.
Exactly. That's the criteria that we put them through.
Right.
I mean, it might not in every utilitarian market, but for us, so we're in Northwest Indiana. I primarily invest in a town called Michigan City, which is a very working class area. But what I love about it is that it's right on Lake Michigan. And so you've got houses on Lake Michigan that are $2-3 million. And then you've got houses downtown that are $50,000-$60,000 because it was an old industrial town. And so in between there, I think there's so much opportunity. And that's what you see in a lot of these Midwestern or Southeastern towns is, this kind of variation of higher end stuff, lower end stuff. And so in between, you can buy properties that still rent really well as short-term rentals, but then as a backup, they'll still cash flow and not kill you if you have to convert them to long-term rentals. Right.
Okay. So now a little bit more about what you said about how you choose a market. You're looking for a market within an hour or so of a major city. Will this not work at all in the more remote areas? I mean, or have you tried it at all? Do you know other people that do? Because I know when I look at Airbnbs, I find some really plain, ordinary houses, and it sounds like that might be what you're talking about, in more isolated areas that still seem to attract people. They get ratings, so I'm assuming someone stayed there. But is that a pretty strict criteria? You want to be within an hour of a major city, or do you venture out any further than that?
It's a great question. It absolutely can work in remote areas. What I tell people is when they're first starting, you don't typically want to be the first Airbnb in an area unless you are very sure of the experience that you're creating there. Because typically the reason that people travel to these more remote areas is for the property itself, for the experience that they're going there for, as opposed to buying in like where we're at. It's a smaller town. It's not huge, about 30,000 people, but it's an hour drive of Chicago. And it's people from Indianapolis, couple hours drive, Detroit, a couple hours drive. So that's our main draw is those cities that are not too far away. And then there's some concentration of population there. And so there's all that, like I said, all the other reasons that people would travel just anywhere where there's population, like visiting family and weddings and funerals and stuff like that.
Sure. Okay, great. Hey, Owen, good to see you. Owen's in Nashville. We've got Juan here in Orlando, wants to know if he can ask questions about seller finance after the talk. We try to stay, Juan, with the topic that we're on. But if it's relevant to what we're talking about, in fact, I was going to ask Kirby here today if he uses seller financing in some of his acquisition stuff. So maybe we can cover that at that point. Hey, Carla, good to see you. Carla's out in North Carolina. So if you guys have a question, just throw it in here. And Juan, if you go ahead and put yours in here, and we'll see how we can work it into the conversation. I guess now's as good a time as any to ask. I mean, we've got some financing questions I know here later, but do you ever use seller financing or some of the more creative techniques in your purchases?
I used to a lot more. I think over the last few years, the main type of financing that works really well for this model is the DSCR type financing or asset-based financing, because more and more lenders are willing to do it on short-term rentals. And so I've found a few lenders that are willing to do that. And so a lot of times I'll do either the BRRRR model where I get either private lending up front, or I use my own capital up front or a hard money loan up front to purchase the property and rehab it. And then once it's done being rehabbed, then say I put 300,000 into it and now it's worth say 400,000 because of the equity that I created, then I can refinance out all that capital into a long-term 30-year DSCR loan. And at the beginning of this year, it was 4.5%. Now it's 8.5%. But they still, in these more affordable markets, you're not taking out $1 million loan. It's say a $300,000 loan or $200,000 loan on a multi-unit property, and so it cash flows really well, even at the 8.5%.
Right, but and I have to argue for creative finance. What if you're taking over payments at 2.5% or 3% on a house that needs $10,000 at most, maybe some paint, carpet, whatever, in a distress type situation?
Yeah.
Anything wrong with that?
After having you on my podcast, you've got me thinking about it a lot more. I think it's just been easier for me to structure deals using the DSCR loan. So maybe it's an element of laziness, but I think absolutely, if you can set it up with creative finance, absolutely. And that's what we used to do a lot more when I was flipping properties, because we didn't have the access to capital like I have now.
Okay. All right. So what kind of cash flow can you expect to do with these more affordable market Airbnbs? We hear these guys talk about $3,000, $5,000 a month in cash flow and these upper end things. But what are we looking at the more affordable model?
Actually, I have a chart that I just put together. I don't know can I share?
You sure can. At the bottom of the screen, you should see a present mode there.
Yeah, let me see if I can share screen.
You should.
You know what?
Yeah.
It may it may not let me. It's asking open system preferences here. That's all right. I can talk through it. So there's the type of property that I recommend buying. So when I first started doing this, I thought I'm going to go out and buy single family homes that would work really well as long-term rentals, and then just try them as short-term rentals.
Right.
And so that was my first thought, because I owned a whole bunch of long-term rentals that were kind of in that same category of these small single family homes, working class areas that cash flowed a few $100s a week. So I tried that with the first one, and it was I was all in for about $100,000 with the purchase and rehab, and it cash flowed about $1,000 to $1,200 a month on average. And so I was kind of blown away compared to the few $100 that I was making on a long-term rental that was very similar. What I didn't realize at the time is that if you buy 2, 3, 4 unit properties, it exponentially that cash flow exponentially goes up, because your expenses are pretty fixed. You might pay a little bit more for a 2 unit, but it's not double everything. But then when you look at the amount of cash flow you're getting per unit, the nightly rate isn't reduced that much, similar occupancy rate. And so you might go from $1,200 a month cash flow on a single family home to, paying a little bit more for a duplex, but now you've got $3,000 a month of cash flow on a duplex. And part of the reason for that is because in the high season, you're renting out that entire duplex. So you can make 3 listings out of that duplex. You make one for each unit, and then one for the whole building. And so in the high season, multiple families want to travel together, and they don't want to rent 3 hotel rooms. They'd rather find a larger place where they can kind of spread out, but they're still together. And so they'll book up that entire building at a premium. And then in the winter, when it's slow and you don't have big families traveling together, you rent it to couples, and you've got the versatility of being able to charge a lower price point, but you've got 2 sources of income or 3 sources of income coming in. So now that's really what we target. And so it's pretty phenomenal when you start looking at the net cash flow that you can get on a duplex, triplex, quadplex. It's like the one that we're working on right now. We bought it for $100,000 or $105,000. We're putting $200,000 into fully gutting it. It's a triplex, and we're expecting just under $6,000 net per month on this triplex. That it's almost like mind-boggling that numbers like that are possible.
Right. Yeah, that is a lot more than I thought, than I was expecting you to say. Or I've heard you throw out those numbers a couple of times. Are most of the properties you're buying requiring extensive rehab like this?
I open myself up to buying rehabs because I've got a crew that just has been with me for years and years, and I don't really have to micromanage them or anything like that. There's a huge trust level built up. It's almost like family, the guy that runs it. So I do rehabs, but you can buy stuff that's more turnkey. I mean, if I was buying that same property, that triplex that I was talking about, maybe I'd pay $350,000 or $400,000 for it as a turnkey property. So I'm not building in as much equity, but it's still going to cash flow really, really well.
Sure. All right, great. Hey, Vincent, good morning. Good to see you. Vincent's down in Houston there. Carl's got a question. Are you using your own booking site outside of the Airbnb platform?
Yeah, it's a good question. We do and we don't. So we have a site called dunedwellings.com because we're in the Indiana Dunes. So that's the name of our properties. Dune Dwellings is the name of the site and our branding. And so when you go to that site, you can see all the properties, but it does link back to Airbnb. We don't have it set up to where people can just go there and book, because we actually like having Airbnb built in as sort of a screening process, because you can see the previous reviews that people have. We only let people automatically book if they have a history of 5-star reviews on Airbnb. So we don't just rent it out to anyone. I think that's a recipe for disaster. And also they know that we're going to rate them, when they check out. We do allow people to reach out to us to ask to book on that site if they're a return guest. So every time a guest stays, we tell them, if you want to come back and avoid 14% Airbnb fees, just reach out to us directly. Go to our site. You can see all of our properties there, and they can reach out to us that way.
Right. So do you use other sites besides Airbnb or just Airbnb?
I do. Up until we got to about 5 properties, we just used Airbnb. And I recommend to people when they're first starting out, just use Airbnb. It's by far the biggest market share of all the other sites. So it's not like you're going to miss out on a ton of bookings because you're only on Airbnb. And you build up your profile quickly. Like I said, you can screen guests really well. You're not going back and forth between a whole bunch of platforms trying to sync pricing and all that stuff. So once we got to 5, then we brought on a property management platform that's kind of the middle, hub of our business, and that pushes out all the changes to our listings and our pricing and all that. So, I think Airbnb, unless there's certain markets that are few and far between, but where VRBO really has the market share, but the vast majority of the other ones, Airbnb works just great.
Right. Okay. All right, we've got a question from Oren, sorry. Hey, Kirby, I'm an Army vet right out of Fort Campbell. Would you recommend using short-term rental outside of military bases or stick with regular long-term rentals due to higher turnover because of PCS?
Man, that's a great question. Yeah. If I could go back to when I was in the military or just getting out, what I would have done is bought a 4-unit property. And this, I know this would work in areas. I don't know if it's just outside of Fort Campbell, but I know like around there's other cities like Louisville and other cities in Kentucky where this would work really well, or just outside of those cities where it works really well. And I'd buy a 4-unit there, and I would focus on short-term rentals, knowing that it could work really well as a long-term rental, as a backup. And I'd use my VA loan, get 100%. And if you can move into one of them, at least for the 6 months or year, whatever that's required. And I think you'll be blown away with the type of income you can make. Now, that being said, it doesn't work everywhere. So I would look at Airbnb, look at the comps in the different cities that you're considering, and see where is the highest nightly rate and the highest occupancy compared to the lowest average purchase price.
Right. Yeah, that's a fantastic tip for people wanting to get started buying these multi-units, using their VA loan. Got 0 down in this thing, and I mean, what a way to get started. Multi-unit right there. That is.
I know people who have been financially free just from that one property that they buy.
Sure. Yeah, and that's a great tip today, guys. Guys, that was worth the hour right there. So if you're a veteran, get out there and get on that today. Let's see, Vincent, what are your thoughts on midterm rentals, traveling nurses, corporate rentals, so on?
Yeah, I think they're fantastic. I think they work really well hand in hand. So I don't focus purely on short-term or purely on midterm, but I utilize both strategies. And the way I do it is basically through calendar management. So pricing, it's sort of an art and a science. You really got to understand supply and demand and recognize that every single day it's different. The pricing, for my calendar today is different than it was yesterday because it's different supply and demand. We're at a different distance from the high season as we were yesterday. There's different amount of inventory available today than there will be a month from now because of the change in how far we are from the high season. So if you look at like high season and low season pricing, in the high season, I don't want to rent to midterm guests because I'm going to have to give them a big discount, and so if I know in the high season, which has been the case for the last many, many years that we've been doing this, every night pretty much is going to be booked up because in most areas, there's just not enough lodging options for the amount of people that want to travel that area in the high season. And so we can charge a premium and we're going to get booked up anyway. But in the low season, then typically what we notice is it's mostly just weekends. It's a lot of people traveling on the weekend, or you can supplement with these midterm stays. And so we'll give bigger discounts, say in August, as we're getting ready to go into the slower season in the winter. We'll drop it down to like a 30, 40, 50% discount if people will book a month or longer.
Right.
And so then we'll start having nurses reach out, or construction companies that are having workers come in town reach out. There's a big steel mill by us, and there's a lot of workers that come in contractually for that. And so if you can fill that in, even at a 50% discount, sometimes if you're getting 100% occupancy, you're actually in a better place cash flow wise than trying to hustle to get that maybe 50% occupancy at a little bit higher price.
Right. Would you recommend, I mean, if you are operating somewhere that has a pretty defined high season, low season, maybe listing on like corporate housing.com or one of those long-term places just during the low seasons and let them book those up in advance?
Yeah, it can work. We haven't done corporate housing specifically, like listed on a corporate housing site,
right.
But we have done furnish finders, which is a big one for nurses that you hear about a lot. But we actually have had much better success with nurses booking on Airbnb. For some reason, you have to pay for furnish finders on an annual basis, which is a pretty small fee. But for some reason, our listings on there, the nurses will reach out to us and always try to negotiate, and the price point needs to be substantially lower than even the discounted rate that we offer on Airbnb. So with Airbnb, we still get, it seems like just as many, if not more, nurses reach out and say, hey, I saw your property. I saw that there's a big discount. Can I book it? And we actually do better that way. It's more streamlined. So we actually canceled furnish finders because we just weren't getting that much value from it. But it's absolutely, I mean, you can work. There's so many different avenues to work. I mean, you could go directly. We could go to the steel mill and talk to them about, anytime somebody's coming in town, reach out to us. There's actually a cancer treatment center not too far away. And we've had a continuous flow of people coming in for cancer treatments that need to stay for a couple weeks at a time. So there's so many different avenues that you can book your place up.
Right. Just curious, and I ask this question because I do it all the time. If I'm looking for a place, whether it, not generally on the long-term stuff, but if I'm looking to book a place for less than 30 days, many times I will ask if they don't have it in their listing, do you give a discount for more than 7 days or more than 14 days? And about half the time they'll come back with a lower number. Do you usually do that?
Yeah, it's the great thing is you can just base that off of what your demand is. So if it's a slow season, if you're coming up right on those dates and you don't think they're going to be booked anyway, then yeah, might as well offer a decent discount. But if I think they're going to be booked anyway, I probably, go back with either a smaller discount or just say, we can't offer that right now. And half the time the people still book, they like the place and they were just testing to see if we would. So, you just got to know what your alternative is. And if it's it's better to have those booked in a lot of cases than to sit on them empty.
Right. So you had mentioned earlier about having a mid-tier sort of management company. So my next question was, do you need a professional manager, or is this something that you can do yourself? I know our realtor that we use here in Arkansas, they do a few short-term rentals and they manage and they do everything themselves. So do you find that that's a good thing to do, or should you just start out with a mid-tier company?
Yeah, it's a good question. We the going rate for property management for vacation rentals is between 20 and 30%. So say average is 25%. I think that's a lot when you start to calculate your gross revenue and take 25% off the top and recognize that doesn't mean that that's covering your cleaners. It doesn't mean it's covering your handyman or maintenance or any of that stuff. It's just somebody to set those things up for you. So when you start to look at that, you start to say, well, what are they doing that I couldn't do myself or set up systems to do myself? And it's really not that much. And in a lot of cases, professional vacation rental managers are managing it's all about scale, so they're managing a ton of properties. It's all about how many properties can I get, and they want heads and beds. They don't really care about screening and keeping that property as nice as they possibly can, like you would as the owner of that property. So a lot of cases you would actually do a much better job, but people think that it's going to take so much time and so much effort, and they just couldn't do it. But what we found is that if you have a great handyman and a great cleaner in place, they can do all the boots on the ground activity. And then we also, after we got to, again, like 4 or 5, and we brought on a property management platform, which is a software. It's called IGMS is the one we use. But once we brought that on, we also brought on a contractor that's a guest relations person, and she's a military spouse. She lives down in Florida, never been to our area before, but she's phenomenal, and she knows our area probably better than most residents at this point. And she does all the bookings for us. She answers all the questions, lines up the cleaners, lines up the handyman. So initially, I thought I needed to do all these things myself, and I was going to the property to do handyman stuff. I was, my wife was actually cleaning our first one herself. But over time, now that we're up to 21 listings, we slowly started implementing these systems, and we realized we don't need. There's properties I haven't visited in a year now because it just runs now because we've got those 3 individuals in place, and we don't pay anywhere close to 25% of our gross revenue.
Right. Man, that sounds like a lot. I mean, I thought management, well, I guess that's just a regular long-term rental. You always think 8 to 10%, but
yeah,
25%. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a big cut. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you can automate it more so than long-term rentals.
Right.
Like, it lends itself so well to technology that I don't think it's worth that much unless you just like were a surgeon that was, never available and could never check your phone ever. And you just couldn't think about it or something like that.
Yeah. I do notice on Airbnb in the reviews that seems to be a really big comment thing in there about the owner or the manager was immediately accessible. If they had any issue, they were right on it. That's a really big deal to people that rent these things.
Exactly. Yeah. I think like 70%, I saw a statistic, 70% of Airbnb users they use it because they want the localized experience, And so when we are setting up our listing, we put our story, like on the Wi-Fi card, we put our story of my wife and I starting this business and our background, and they can see our profile on there that they're booking with people. It's not like vacation rental management company 1 or whatever, it's actual people, and there's a personal touch to it. And we get so much great feedback. We have almost all 5-star reviews after almost 1,000 stays. And I think a lot of it has to do with just feeling human as opposed to just turning into a commodity, and just trying to churn out as much revenue as possible.
And I'll tell you from my experience and over the last couple of years is if it's Frank and Sue and their little picture on there as the operators, as opposed to XYZ Management Corporation, you're going to hear from them. You're going to hear from Frank and Sue a lot faster than you're going to ever. If you ever, we've messaged the companies before, big companies that you would know the names of, and never heard back from them at all. So that's for sure. So I mean, and I heard this early in my entrepreneur journey. Nobody's going to manage your business like you do, and even the best, unless you're just a poor people person, I guess. So let's see.
And there's some people that they don't care. They their goal is to have as much quantity as possible, and so they're good with, as long as I have 4.5 stars and can keep getting bookings, I don't really care if people have bad experiences. It's just about the amount of revenue I'm going to make overall. So, but I can't, it's like foreign to me. I want to have high quality, and I think long-term, growing a little bit slower with higher quality, it's a better better way to live.
Sure. Penn had a question. What about searching government lists to see out-of-state companies that won bids in your market? As far as when you're going to have an influx of people or things like that. At least that's how I understand the question.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. It's not something I've thought of, so I think it's something that I'll maybe look into. But that's great. I mean, we get a lot of contractors coming in. We actually just had a group check out. So we live on a farm here, and we turned our barn in the back, part of it, into an Airbnb. And it's this cool little Airbnb that pays for the entire farm just because it makes about $4,000 a month. And we just had a group checkout that was here for about 2 weeks, and they're contracted to work on at the steel mill that's close by. So yeah, stuff like that all the time. Contracted work, government work, I'm sure would be a great option.
Right. Okay. Carl had a question. Do your bookings go down with the Airbnb platform changes, or did they go down?
Yeah, great question, because they just made one of the biggest changes to their algorithm that they've made ever, I guess. Nobody really totally knows the algorithm other than the Airbnb folks, but they did put out, it's called a winter release, where they, said the things that they wanted changed. And I think this stemmed out of the fact that after the pandemic, there's a big drop off during the pandemic, initially of hosts. And then right after the pandemic, there's a big increase in people that wanted to use Airbnbs, get out of the city, get rent a house to work out of remotely, that sort of thing. So Airbnb was trying to woo in more hosts. And just because of the amount of demand, hosts could just do whatever they wanted and get booked, 90% occupancy rate. They could ask any sort of fee. They could ask you to do, when you check out, do the laundry, wash the windows if they wanted to, like it was getting kind of crazy. And so there was a lot of complaints. There's been a lot of complaints over the last year or so of kind of hosts getting out of control. And so Airbnb wants to rein that back in. And so now they're saying, we're going to make pricing more transparent. So instead of getting hit with all these fees after you go to book the property, now people can search based on the entire price. You can't put on these crazy like items that people have to do when they check out. So there's different, and they're also pushing the value-based properties a lot more, and the lower cost properties. They want to encourage hosts to drop their pricing because they're getting a bad rap as being no longer being the more affordable alternative to hotels. So because of that, they're pushing the more valuable properties, or the more value-based properties. And so I think, again, this type of investing is kind of in that sweet spot, because with the $200,000 house, even if I'm at $150 a night on average, you can still make several $1,000s a month, or at least $1,000 a month, which is a great income on a $200,000 house. So in terms of net, cash flow after all your expenses. So, I think there's some room in there to provide even better value, as opposed to some of these houses that are really expensive and they just don't have the ability to drop much or remove some of their fees. So I have not noticed any. We've stayed at a 70% occupancy rate since we started. We haven't noticed any drop off, but I know there's areas where people say, I was at 80% and I haven't had a booking in the last 2 months. And I think it's because of some of the changes that Airbnb is making.
Right. So, and you're talking about all these tasks that they have you do. Do you have an extensive list of things that your guests have to do before they leave? I'll tell you, Jody and I stayed in a house. I mean, it was an awesome house in Coeur d'Alene, and I don't remember how much it was. It was several $100s a night. And you wouldn't believe the list of things we found when we got there. We had to strip the beds. We had to roll the garbage up this 90-degree incline driveway and I wrote in my review, I didn't expect to have to do a lot of this work when I came to this house for, I don't know what we stayed, 2 or 3 nights. It was crazy. So I think
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about. But I mean, is that the norm? Most Airbnbs we've stayed
Yeah.
in, we didn't have to do anything but pack our clothes and leave.
Yeah, it's gotten to be more and more of that. And so I think
Right.
that's part of the reason behind this. So Brian Chesky specifically mentioned stripping the beds as one of
Mhm.
the things that you can't ask people to do. You can't
Right.
ask them to vacuum, put the laundry in, stuff like that, that should be a, house cleaner
Right.
job. But he said you can ask them reasonable things,
Mhm.
like turning off the lights, locking the
Sure.
doors, and so I think there's some things that are in the middle that we do ask. So we do ask people to do their own dishes, the
Mhm.
dishes they use, wash them.
Right.
Um, but beyond that, it's pretty like, we have a checklist by the door when they
Mhm.
leave. It's like, did you remember to log out of your Netflix account? Did you
Right.
remember to turn off the stove? So it's not like things that we're really asking them to do, but it's like just more reminders. I think
Mhm.
that's reasonable.
Right. Oh yeah, for sure that is. But man, the whole stripping the beds
Yeah.
thing. And this was like, I don't know, it's like a 5 bedroom house. And we didn't use all of them, but they wanted everyone stripped and
Yeah.
all of this stuff done. It was just crazy.
You need 2
Uh,
hours to check out with all
it
the
really,
tasks you gotta do.
for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, I sent them a bill. Hey, Matt, good to see you here this morning. Got a question for you. This is my question, Kirby, about furnishing an Airbnb. What is uh, the best, most affordable way for someone just getting into this to where do you get your stuff to
Yeah,
furnish
great
the house?
question. So what I tell people is I would not be furnishing any property if I wasn't married to my wife,
Mhm.
because I think that's the worst part of the whole process, in
Right.
my opinion. But she loves it. So we still furnish our own properties. But what I recommend to people is to reach out to several home stagers in the area, because these are people who constantly are moving furniture in and out of houses. They have the crew to do it. They have inventory of furniture that's used that they got probably at a discount buying in bulk.
Right.
It's been used, but it hasn't really been used. Nobody's
Mhm.
actually sat in that chair. It's just been in 20 different
Right.
houses, and they constantly are turning over their inventory.
Mhm.
So you can hire a home stager a lot cheaper than a designer to come
Mhm.
in and do everything for you. Give them
Right.
your concept, and they'll sell you the furniture with it at a discount because it's used furniture, and it also saves you the work of having to set
Mhm.
it up. So that's what I recommend to people. We do it ourselves in terms of like the design and setup. I have a couple workers that work with me that actually assemble all the furniture and stuff. But my wife likes to be the one to set up the space, and it turns out beautifully.
Mhm.
Um, but we've gotten our furniture from stagers.
Right.
That's a like we bought out a whole warehouse of furniture that they were looking to get rid of because they were bringing in new inventory.
Mhm.
And then she's always on marketplace, buying the big stuff.
Mhm.
And then I actually went through and just made a list of all the things that we order for all the houses, like
Right.
the pots and pans and the coffee maker, and even mattresses and bed sheets and stuff like that, to where I can just go through and click on that, and it's I can order all the small stuff
Mhm.
in a half hour, and it,
Right.
it's all just basically is delivered. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay. So you just basically have like a package deal, like a certain set of dishes, a certain coffee maker, whatever, and that's just a per house thing that you do.
Exactly. Yeah, the
Yeah.
small stuff, there's
Right.
really not we don't change a whole lot.
Mhm.
It's just the big stuff we try to get deals on, and
Right.
that's kind of unique to the
Mhm.
house.
Sure. Okay. So and I know it's ballpark. A lot of it's negotiation. Some of it's luck. But if I go out today and I go, I love what Kirby does. I'm going to go find a house and turn it into a short term rental. What could I expect to pay for a 3 bedroom, 2 bath, just typical average neighborhood home? What could I expect to pay to furnish that house to have it ready to go?
Yeah, it's a good question. We kind of came up with the rule of thumb that it's worked out this way for almost all of our properties, that it's somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 per room.
Mhm.
And what I mean by per room, that's bedroom, living room, and kitchen. So if it's a 3 bedroom with a living room and kitchen, then basically that's 5 rooms multiplied by 2,500, and that's if you're, you know, finding stuff on marketplace that on the bigger items, and then we just order all the other stuff mostly off of Amazon and Target and that sort of thing. And that includes all the house automation, so like locks. We use the Nest family, so we have Nest thermostat, Nest lock, Nest doorbell cameras. It includes all the pots and pans, all the everything. So that's typically how it works out for us.
On things like dishes, do you typically go more high end or lower end and replace them frequently? What's the best thing to do on that?
Yeah, we're probably more toward, like, I would say, lower end in terms of price point. You don't want to have like the cheapest stuff, but you're not going to get much more return out of higher end dishes like name brand anything really, unless you're like, again, like multi-million-dollar property and your guests are, very high end guests, and they're going to expect luxury on everything. But for us, it just, we just don't see much more of a return. The spaces are really nice. I can tell you, like, everyone raves about them. Like, most people say it's one of the nicest Airbnbs they've stayed in. And that's just because we're thoughtful in the way that we decorate and the space that we create there, as opposed to just buying IKEA furniture and, there's no art on the walls and it's just like a sterile environment. But you don't have to pay a ton of money to create that.
I'll tell you, it really makes a difference to me when I look at an Airbnb property or whatever, and we're looking for something. I'm looking at that furniture. I want to know if it's going to be comfortable, or if it's going to be the totally cheap stuff that you can't sit on for 5 minutes. Yeah. And then they vary so much too. And some people, there's not a picture on a wall anywhere. It's like you're in some kind of institution or something. Yeah. And then some people really trick them out. There's a theme there. If it's in Florida, it's beachy. If it's in the mountains, it's mountain-like. So do you guys tend to really decorate like that with the theme of where it's at, or are y'all sort of minimalist in that?
Well, what I recommend is what I tell people all the time is the person who knows their ideal guest the best is going to do the best, because they're going to create the experience for that ideal guest. You're still going to have people who don't fit that profile book there, but we decorate it for our ideal guest. And that's people, typically the vast majority of people who have never been to Michigan City before. They're coming there to experience a new town, probably go to the beach. There's an outlet mall, there's a casino, there's wineries, there's stuff to do. So we leave coupons for the winery. We have a whole history. We made it's 3 canvas prints on the wall, big canvas prints. We went to the library and created a whole history of Michigan City, because it's this unbelievable historic town. It used to create the most train cars of any town in the whole U.S. back in the 1800s. And so there's all this history. And so we put it like in different eras, and so that people feel like I'm a part of history now and I understand where I'm staying. And we do have historic like photos on the wall and stuff like that of the area. And so people rave about that stuff, and it's small touches, but it's understanding, like you said, it's creating sort of a theme depending on who that ideal guest is, and really understanding why they're there and what's really going to make them get excited.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you guys really, really are ideal hosts and really try to do it right. Do you guys do welcome gifts, fruit baskets, or wine, or things like that when they come in?
Yeah, we've tested that over the years. And what we landed on, it was kind of complicated to do like baskets and stuff, like in terms of like things that are customized. So now we have a process with our cleaners. So we stock wine in the closet, and it's actually sangria. So we've tested different types of wine. It's Winking Owl Sangria, which everyone loves the flavor of. It's like $4 at Aldi. And it's not like, nobody's like a sangria snob. Like if you put like a Merlot, or I don't know, it's some other type of wine, they're like, oh, this isn't my type of wine. But sangria, it's like nobody has like a specific sangria typically. And so we leave that, a bag of microwave popcorn, and then a personalized note. So we have a standard message that we leave, but we personalize it the the cleaner, when they're there,
Mhm.
they get the name of the person staying. And I think that makes a big difference for people feeling welcome when it has their name on it when they walk in. And so that's the standard thing that's on there. And then we also have the guest book that has all the recommendations for things to do, the map of where they are in relation to all the attractions around it, the coupons for the wineries. So there's definitely touches, but it's all systematized to where we're not creating something new or baking chocolate chip cookies each time, because it's just something that would be really tough to keep up with.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's amazing. And I found this in the past. We used to do Section 8 rentals, and there were little things you could do to make that property just really stand out. But just something like what you said. And as far as sangria, I've never had a bad sangria.
Yeah.
It didn't matter if it was the $4 bottle or the more expensive, or you made it yourself. It's all good.
Exactly.
But you know, where you can spend, you know, $5 and just make a major difference in how it feels when you walk in that house.
Exactly.
You know, because people love to feel special, you know.
Yeah, you're in like some new house. You don't know, did I even walk in the right house? Like, am I supposed to be here? And they have a note that says, welcome, you know, let us know if we can get you anything. It just makes a big difference.
Yeah, I must be in the right place. It's got my name on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Hey, guys, we've got a few more minutes. So if y'all have got any last minute questions for Kirby regarding short-term rentals, let's get those in here. So now, my big concern about short-term rentals, and I know we talked about this when I was on your podcast, is when a city or a town or the city council gets together and just out of the blue say, you know what, we don't want any more of these things. So in 30 days, if you've got one, it better not be one anymore. And I have a student in our Max group that owns several in New Jersey, and this happened overnight. So if he had fallen into that, well, it won't cash flow as a regular, just turn it into an Airbnb, it'll be okay, man, he'd have been in big trouble. Mm-hmm. But he did more of what you do with just the regular type houses, so he was okay. So what do you do to protect yourself when you're researching a market? I mean, you can't predict the future, but are there some signs you can look for, some things that would tell you this might not be a good idea, I should stay out of this area?
Absolutely. Yeah, and like you said, as a backup, starting with in a worst case scenario, you know, because nobody knows the future. So maybe they make a national rule against them or something like that, and everyone's screwed, you know. So it's unlikely, but you know, you want to plan for, in a worst case scenario, I still can use this as a long-term rental. So that's the first thing. And then I start with just selecting an area based on starting with the big data first. So like going to the state level and saying, okay, is this state business friendly? Are they, you know, investor friendly typically, like in their past? And if it's not, you know, I tend to start with a better state, you know, where just from a state level, if I can, and then go down to the county, same thing, and then go down to the cities. And in the cities, then what I want to see is that they've made a rule on it, you know, because typically you don't see cities every year flip-flopping or anything like that. Typically they make a rule, unless there's a major issue with the rule that they made, they can always change it in the future. But in a lot of cases, they make a rule around short-term rentals because it becomes an issue at some point and they need to have a rule around it. And that issue is going to be the same going forward. And so that rule can vary. A lot of people think, well, they don't allow them or they allow them. That's not it. There's about 1,000 different variations that city councils have come up with that are the most creative rules you've ever heard of. And also the rules and the enforcement are two totally different things as well, because they'll make rules that they can never enforce in 1,000 years, but they'll make the rule. But pay attention to what those rules are. And so in like my area, it's a old industrial town. There's parts that are really struggling still, you know? And so they're very business friendly. They want to bring in new business. They talked about Airbnbs a couple of years ago for the first time because it started to become, you know, a thing in the city. And everyone was like, we do not want you to limit Airbnbs because it's helping my restaurant. It's helping my, you know, all the other businesses in town. And so they said, all you have to do is just register at the city, provide your name and and who owns it. So if the fire department or police have to show up in the middle of the night, we know who to call, but there's no fee, there's no inspection, nothing like that. And so they make it very simple, as opposed to other cities, nearby, where it's a bit harder. And so I selected it based on the rule that was already made. I think the scary part is where you get in these cities where they haven't made a rule yet, and you're kind of guessing or hoping that they're going to be favorable in the future.
Right. So the differences in short-term rentals and long-term, if you're a landlord in Podunk, America, you typically know what the rules are regarding non-paying tenants, how to evict, and so forth. How does this work with a short-term rental? Let's say that Joe's supposed to check out on Monday and he doesn't, and you get in contact with him. He says, I've just decided I'm going to stay a while and I'm not going to pay you. Are the rules different for short-term rentals? How does that work? How do you get somebody out that's not?
Yeah, they are different, and they vary in different areas. So in most states, you're not considered to have tenant rights until you've been there up to 30 days. And again, somebody's listening to this going, that's not the case in my state. I get it. Every state's different. If you live in California, Godspeed to you, because the rules there, I don't know how anyone navigates those. But in most states, it's up to 30 days. So if you think about a hotel, somebody could check into a hotel and just sit in a hotel and say, I'm never checking out either. But the hotel owner is going to call the police, and the police are going to escort them out eventually. So they're considered trespassing after a certain point. So that's the difference: is when are they considered trespassers, and when are they considered tenants and get tenant rights? And so you want to be careful of that. So what most people do is they have a automatic booking turned on for up to a certain amount of days. And then beyond that, we allow people to request to book, longer stays, but we don't let them automatically book, because we want to have a conversation, really understand, yes, they are a nurse that's coming into town for 4 months. They're not just a squatter who's looking for a place that they can move into and get those tenant rights.
Right. So if you do those 30-day stays, or you let someone book your place for 2 months, then you could be in just a typical eviction type situation after that, depending on the state.
Yeah, and I typically sign a lease and treat them just as a tenant in those situations. So, I use avail.co, which is a free property management software where I can create the lease, send them the lease electronically, collect their payments. So, they're basically a tenant at that point.
Okay. All right. I think we got a question. Vincent, before you buy a property, you first make sure it cash flows as just a rental first. Sorry if you already answered that. Yeah, I think that's super important. That's something Kirby and I agree on.
Yeah.
As opposed to the guys that say, oh, it won't cash flow as a regular rental. We'll just make it an Airbnb and you're good.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yep,
absolutely. That's a main criteria.
Okay, cool. All right. So Kirby, tell everybody, I know that we've shared the links a couple of times to your podcast. You got a podcast. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I've got a podcast called Living Off Rentals that I started several years ago, and it's been just a fun journey, and I've had a ton of great subject matter experts over the years. You were just on there a few weeks ago, and so I'd love for if you want more information, you can check that out, or our YouTube channel as well. It's also Living Off Rentals, and then I also help people get their first vacation rental. Find how to find, buy, and set it up, their first sort of non-traditional, high cash flowing vacation rental like the ones that we buy. And so I kind of walk through my system at the link that you're showing right now, livingoffrentals.com/start. So if you go there, there's a presentation that I did that will walk you through how we think about finding a property, how we think about the type of property within the market that you're looking in, and then how to finance that property as well.
Yeah, so you guys go over there and check that out. Presentation that'll go over some of the stuff we did today, and then of course I'm sure some extra stuff here. Okay, Matt says thanks guys, have an amazing day. Same to you, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
Well, Kirby, man, we sure appreciate you coming on here with us today. And you've actually got me to thinking more about short-term rentals. Everything Jody and I do. In fact, we're doing our first wholesale flip. Gosh, how long has it been since you did a wholesale flip? For me, it's been years. 8 years for you. But we just happened up on this thing, and it's actually a pretty good one. We'll talk about it after tomorrow when it closes. But it was pretty sweet. But everything I do has just been note creation for the last 10, 12 years. So I'm like you. I create cash flow, but I don't own anything. Yeah, I mean, I own a piece of paper, and that sort of thing. So we've been decided to say, hey, we're getting old. We probably need to keep some assets out there. So it sounds like the short-term rental thing. I'm getting old. Oh, okay, I'm getting old. She's not getting old. She's just 21.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, so yeah, you've really sold me on that. We're going to start looking.
Nice. It's the best of both worlds if you can buy in these markets where it works both ways. So
yeah. All right. So Kirby, thanks so much for being here and talking to us about rentals. We really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right. Hey, great. All right. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye. All right. Okay, guys, that is it for Goat Talk for today. We appreciate you joining us. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel at sub2tv.com. And I guess we'll see you guys next week. So until then, get out there, talk to some sellers, buy some houses.